Hi, I'm going to do another video on Vadi's guards. Hopefully these are interesting to you. I want to talk about something I touched upon in previous videos on kind of variations in guard, the things that I consider to be non-essential to guards, and some specific principles that kind of underpin all the guard transitions that are important that I didn't really touch upon before. Okay. The reminder from previous video, all of Vadi's guards are waypoints between actions, right? So the guards exist not just as static positions to start in, but also I'm doing a thing and I come to the guard. Because of that, we need to accept that there is some natural variation within the guard that doesn't change guard, doesn't mean it's a different guard. What do I mean by that, right? Guard of the lady. This is common parrying guard. For swords coming in here, right, this covers it nicely, right? My body is covered, swords coming in here. But if my opponent is changing angle even slightly, I probably want to adapt to do that, right? If they're coming a nice horizontal cut across my head, I might be a bit higher. If they're a bit lower, cut to the body, it might have to be down here, right? Because ideally I want to be catching it in the bottom half of my sword, right? So from coming here for a cut to the head, there's a good chance it's going to cut through. Here I'm probably fine, right? But likewise, if they're cutting here I've covered that, here I haven't. So that's true of all of them, right? And again, if I'm cutting somewhere, right? If I want to cut high with a horizontal strike, I might end up here. If I want to cut a bit lower, I might end up here, right? If I'm coming down on top of the sword or whatever it happens to be, thrusting angles, right? If I'm using the sword, this is what we thrust into, right? But Vadi depicts it like this. But if I'm going to thrust into it, obviously I'm going to be arms extended, right? And again, this is all the same kind of guard. So if we accept that that the guards are where we act to, as well as where we act from, we have to accept that there will be this variation in a guard without it changing what the nature of the guard is, because we're acting in a way that responds to whatever position our opponent happens to be in. So that's why sometimes I'll say, people will ask me like, well, is this Falcon, or is this Falcon, or is this Falcon? And it's like, yeah, they all are, right? Similarly to what I've said before, what matters for guard is which leg is forward, which side of the body you're on, where the sword is pointing, roughly, right? That's kind of it, right? Everything else in terms of exact position is just extraneous detail, with some specifics I'm going to come to in a second. The best thing to see this for, and the detail that comes up quite often in the people trying to copy the guard images, is the foot position, right? And we see this quite explicitly in the source. I'll use Archer to demonstrate this, because it's one we see lots of variation for. Where we see Archer in the book, we see it like this. Actually, you see it from the other side, right? You see it like this, okay? All right, so you kind of got this very straight back leg, kind of foot is maybe slightly up, front foot is kind of slightly up. And we see a similar position, right, with this kind of narrow stance with, again, with Falcon. There's at least one other, I think it's True Window. It's kind of like this. Yeah, it's True Window. And some people are like, well, sometimes I hold them like this, right? Wider stance. And people are like, well, that's different. It's not the same guard. Again, if we accept that a point of action, it has to be. But Archer is the best example for this, because actually with Archer we see this when he depicts it in the guard. In the first play, he's in this position, right? Very first play. I think actually that one you see it this way, right? Very first play looks like that. We'll put it up on screen. It's an Archer position with a nice extended leg. Why? Because in this position he's using it as a position of attack. And then we see Archer again in the mixed weapons play, and he's doing something like this, right? He didn't say it's Archer, but it's clearly an Archer style position. If there's anything, it's Archer, right? We see it kind of all the way back here, charged to defend against the spear. So you see this position, these guards variations in a lot of the text. Why do we see the narrow stance, right? Particularly with the high guards. I think we're seeing the narrow stance because if we're too heavy on our front leg, our leg is vulnerable. It's kind of hard from these high positions to come down for a leg parry. Right, if I'm here, you see this a lot in the Bolognese horses. If I want to parry the leg, I can just kind of drop the point. If I'm all the way up here, that's not going to happen. Prevent Elenites doing a leg slip by kind of pre-slipping the leg. That's what I think you're seeing there. You can also just slip the leg. Vadi doesn't ever talk about that, but you can do it. And you know, that, again, we see these variations in some places in the book. We need them if we want to follow this principle. But there are some things that seem wrong because of other advice that Vadi gives, right? So some of the boundaries that I would say, low guards, right? All of these, as I say, this kind of position for what I mean is iron door right now, this is all kind of fine. We rarely ever see swords out here. Vadi does actually have, again, in the against spear section, he does show you this because you're trying to bat a spear out the way that's being thrown at you. So to some extent, that might be true. But Vadi also has a line earlier in the text that says that we want to keep our sword pointing towards our opponent. So I find that if your sword is coming wide on the side, you know, Fiore's iron door is at right angles, and he's also got, you know, the kind of longer, kind of backwards, long tail. But both because if you're doing this kind of cut that comes down and then goes really wide, it's a very strange cutting motion, cutting arc, but also this advice that your sword should be pointing towards your opponent. This sort of narrow arc of the low guards is much better, right? Don't come super wide. You're losing a lot of aspects. The benefits for thrusting are also quite large when you do it that way. So low guards, actually guards in general, we're kind of staying in this arc. All right, we've got a person in front of us. We want our sword pointing roughly towards them. We don't really want to come wider than this. It's kind of a 90-degree arc, but not, you know, where you're in the middle of it, either side. So 45 degrees either side. The other thing, and again, this is not explicit in the guard section, but the other thing to bear in mind is your edge alignment. Vadi, time and time again, I think in at least 3 occasions, but certainly 2, he says that downward motions, the fendente, use the true, well, he's talking about cuts, right? Fendente, use the true edge, downward cuts, use the true edge. Going from your right side, your strong side, use the true edge. Going from your weak side, you use the false edge. Explicitly, he ties that to cuts, but I think it also transfers to guard transitions. Now, he uses the same cutting terms to describe parrying in several cases, so it's not completely illogical to extend it to guard transitions as well. But also remember, you know, there are waypoints of action, so if it's the same guard I'm coming to finish my action, it should be the same rules apply to it. This particularly comes up with the point up guards, right? You may have seen it in my previous video. If I'm transitioning from here to here, notice that my edge alignment doesn't change, right? That follows that rule, right? If I'm going right to left, I use the true edge. If I'm going left to right, I use the false edge, rather than twisting, right? The twist, to use true edge out here, bent wrists. I mentioned this in the previous video. Bent wrists and a parry is a bad idea. This bend is fine. This bend is not, because it puts the shock puts pressure on the wrist. This causes RSI. This is fine. You know, your wrist is relaxed in this particular case. Okay, here. When we're coming right to left, likewise, if I'm coming from a different guard, right to left. Straight across. Less twisting, less issues on the wrist, also charges the counterattack better. But if you're going downwards, so if I'm coming here, so any kind of situation where my edge is pointing downwards, I'm going to be using the true edge, following that advice about fendente. So in general, right, these are the things to be pedantic about. Which edges out? Good, bad, right? Staying in the plane. How wide we go. The only guard that violates this position is my favorite guard that also violates most rules Vadi has, and it's the Falcon guard. Okay, every other guard, we're staying in that kind of 45-degree arc, keeping our sword pointing towards the opponent. That's it for this. I'm going to stop talking about guards in general from next week, and I'll start talking about more specifics about the different styles of guard and what we can do from them and to them.